Bill, wait until the end, and then you can decide whether you actually want to apply. So Bill started us off today by saying we now know enough that we can make predictions. So I'm going to try to make a half a dozen predictions. But the one that's safest to say is that I would not be in any position to say any of this if it weren't for a whole bunch of co-authors. So many I'm not going to take the time to name them all, but I really am appreciative of this being a team effort. So the first specific prediction I'll make is that the legal marijuana market's consumption will be concentrated amongst daily and near-daily users who are blue-collar and not primarily concentrated amongst youth. And I say that in part because that's where we are today. So I have here 4 bars ranging from past year users, past month users, over to total consumption. And I break those bars down by how frequently the people are using. At the bottom in black, that's the people who use every single day. And then the next chunk with the hashes are the near daily users. They're only 20% of marijuana users past year, but 1/3 of past month users, 2/3 of days of use. A weird metric, but it's one we have good data on. And they are 80% of the quantity consumed. They are the market. If you want to go try to make money off this legal marijuana industry, you don't give a hoot about the people who use only on weekends. They are negligible. This is a market of daily and near daily users, and that's completely normal. That is also the case with alcohol. It's also the case with golf balls. This is the Pareto law. 20% of people are responsible for 80% of the consumption. Now I said blue collar. Here I've got 4 substances: alcohol, tobacco, marijuana, and cocaine, broken down by SES measured in terms of education. Alcohol is a rich person's drug. The more money you have, the more you drink. And the religious groups that are most associated with complete abstinence tend not to be drawn from the elite economic strata of the country. Cocaine used to be elite. It is not anymore. Cocaine is very much a poor person's drug. Tobacco and marijuana are in between, and right now they're at about the same place. So if you think you know what the demographics of tobacco use are, now disproportionately poor, less educated, and disadvantaged, that's the demographic of marijuana use, and that is a shock to most people. Because most of what you read about marijuana comes from the proponents who live in the blogosphere, who are college educated, whose friends are college educated. Marijuana is associated with the 1960s campus movement, but it is not a college person's drug. College graduates account for 1/7 of the marijuana market. Now, the trends are in a little bit different way. The cigarette trend is towards less advantage. The marijuana trend, as we normalize use, is moving a little bit upscale, but it's got a long ways to go before it matches alcohol. You know, I made this provocative comment: we're all here to protect the kids, and I said this market is not primarily going to be about kids. Here is total marijuana use, 1979. President Carter was president, during the peak of the drug war, and then you see the resurgence. We're back up to the total level of marijuana use we had in the late 70s, but a very, very different age distribution. Back in 1979, almost all of it was consumed by people who were 25 years old and younger, and now under 21 is not the bulk of the market. The bulk of the market is the folks who are 30 and over. And at this point, I want to draw on some expert consulting advice from a part of my team back here. I brought my daughter along. Jackie, how old are you? 12. You're 12. If you think about somebody who's 30, are they young or are they old? Not really young. They're, yeah, so I warned Jack when I was going to ask her this, and she said, but I'll offend everybody. We're old, but if you're in the mindset of a youth, yeah, even if it's just 30 and over, and the majority of the market is older folks. That is fact, and Tom started us off differentiating between facts and opinion. That's a fact. Here's opinion, here's a guess, here's a hope from an eternal optimist. If I put up in front of you, the faces of the people most associated with the marijuana legalization movement, they do not look representative of America today. They look like a bunch of old white guys. I have a hope, it's only a hope, that we might be able to make marijuana banal and uninteresting as it becomes legal.
Where's the camera, right?
All right, the next prediction is that production costs are going to fall sharply. So Roger, I think you were the person who said you don't like the term legalization. I think legalization is a very important term to keep in our lexicon to differentiate it from just decriminalization, just medical. Because what legalization means is legalizing the production, the supply chain, and that affects price, and as has been brought up earlier, price affects use. Now, if we legalized nationwide, and we allowed those professional farmers in Iowa to do it, not sort of 65-year-old hippies with 99 plants on a little farm in California, the price would just collapse. And right now, industrial hemp farms in Canada produce at less than $1,000 an acre. Marijuana for intoxication wouldn't be that cheap because you would be transplanting the female plant. But if you look at comparable crops, it's $5,000 to $20,000 an acre, and you could produce THC equivalent levels of 1,000 pounds per acre. So you do the math, the division, even with processing costs. After all, tobacco processing costs are less than $1 a pound. You're talking about something like $20 a pound for the production of the marijuana, as against a current farm gate price of about $2,000 a pound. And it wouldn't even be very many farms. 8,000 acres can produce all of the THC consumed in the entire country in a year. That's like 8 farms in Iowa. So if the nation legalized and we allowed professional farmers to apply their skill, marijuana would be like bottled water. And if you go to the grocery store, this is not free, but the price is not driven by the cost of producing the water. It's driven by the marketing, the branding, the shelf space, the cost of paying the retail clerk who checks you out, and so on. So potential price declines are enormous because marijuana is spectacularly productive. A heavy user uses a pound a year. Do you eat apples? Would a pound of apples last you a year? No, I mean, this is just a different order of magnitude. It's an agricultural crop, but the quantities we consume are so small that the production side wouldn't be big if we legalized nationwide, which we have not. So that's legalized nationwide. This is where we are now. I spent a lot of my time trying to fill in between and figure out what the heck is the industry going to look like when 2 states have legalized but the Federal Controlled Substances Act remains in place. And I'll let you in on a secret. I don't know. I mean, we're really trying to figure this out, but it depends a lot on what the federal government does and does not do, but probably the prices are going to go down a lot. And so a corollary of this is that I would predict a lot of product differentiation. I think it will be hard to make millions of dollars as just the bulk producer of undifferentiated intoxicating cannabis. It's going to be like lettuce. The people are going to try to make money by bundling it in the form of candies and chocolates and so on, or they're going to try to sell a boutique, hand-grown, organic, special mix that achieves certain properties. It'll be in those niches that people are going to be trying to make the money, and so I think that this will be a prompt to a lot of differentiation, a lot of proliferation of different forms of the intoxicant. All right, my next prediction is taxes cannot make up the difference between current prices and prices after legalization. Because the usual thing you hear from proponents of legalization is, yeah, production costs will collapse, but that's good because then we'll just capture the difference in price as revenue for the states. We'll keep the price where it is. I'm skeptical. The challenge is that that price decline, as I pointed out, is in the couple $1,000s a pound. And what really is going to drive the ability to collect taxes is the value to weight ratio. Think about it from the perspective of the gray market arbitrage. How much value can you put in your trunk and drive across from one jurisdiction to another. And so I'm going to show you some statistics from tobacco, which is our best analog right now, where we know there is tax evasion in tobacco. And this is a scatter plot, one dot for each state in the country, percentage of the market in that state that evades taxes, at least the state taxes, and then the horizontal axis is the tax per pack of cigarettes. And there's a relationship, higher taxes lead to greater evasion. And now I want to put a marijuana tax, is that not clear? Is there? I want to put a marijuana tax on the same axes. And I'm going to be generous in a sense. I'm going to just do a $50 an ounce tax. That's really not enough. Current prices are like $2.50 an ounce. All-in production costs, including distribution, is probably more like $50. So it's more like a $200 an ounce gap there. Well, let's go with a $50 an ounce tax. Where would that fit on this graph? And the answer is back where we were eating lunch. I have to shrink down that whole scatter plot in order to get the axis to allow me to put $50 an ounce on the same graph. Now, there is no way that you can extrapolate from tobacco data to marijuana data. I'm not in any way suggesting this is a precise point estimate. It's just a visual way of saying a flipped comment that we can prevent the price decline just by imposing taxes implies extraordinary confidence in the Department of Revenue's ability to prevent evasion, because in a value to weight ratio, this is utterly unprecedented. No other excise tax is anything close to $50 an ounce in a value to weight sense. It's almost 1-to-1. It's 20 grams for a pack, so 28 grams to an ounce. Oh, 20. Yeah. I'm sorry? Oh, roughly twice as many. So in very round terms, it's half a gram for a marijuana cigarette versus a gram for a tobacco cigarette. In the United States. In Europe, the joints are much smaller. It's a little bit like their desserts are smaller and their waistlines are smaller. I don't really understand why. It's only a quarter of a gram in Europe. All right, the next prediction I want to make is that the status quo is not stable. I mean, right now we've got 2 states that legalized, 48 that have not, federal government is not. That is not a stable situation. If you put yourself in the shoes of producers in Colorado, for the next couple of years, you say, this is fantastic, I can start to sell to people in Colorado, all well and good. But you're eventually going to notice that Colorado has only 2% of the nation's marijuana users. The circles on this graph are the number of marijuana users in each of those states, and there's a whole bunch more outside of Colorado. And realistically, we can't put walls around a state and maintain a sharp price differential across the border of a state. We can't even maintain a big price differential across the international border here. It's about a $300 a pound price differential between this side of the Mexican-American border and this side. And there's a lot of enforcement at that border, and you don't have the same constitutional protections against search and seizure. The border control agencies can ask you to open up the trunk of the car you're driving in from Mexico. You're driving the car from Colorado, Nebraska. If they say, let me see what's in the trunk, you can say, no, I don't want you to see what's in the trunk. So I think that in the long run, and it will take years, but when the production is really ramped up, and if you've got $1,000 or $500 a pound product here, and the current prices for the year are $4,000 a pound, you're not going to be able to prevent an arbitrage of those prices. That's huge value to weight ratio. It's possible to keep a price difference in concrete because it's very expensive to smuggle concrete. It is not possible to do it with marijuana. So this is a map that my students created where they tried to project the impact of diversion from Colorado on prices throughout the country. And it's big, for 75% price decline. So this is the reason why it's not realistic to say the federal government just let each state do what it wants to do. It will not affect the others. Now, when I showed this graph before the November election, Seversk, is that the right name? Mason, I was going to say Matt. Mason Seversk, he was furious with me. He said, no way. It's monitored, thinking now about the medical market, it's monitored from seed to sale, cameras on every step of the supply chain, couldn't possibly have any of it slip out. I'm not sure, but even if no one who gets a license breaks the rule, you can still have a smurf and aggregate strategy. So a half dozen friends who are Colorado residents every day buy an ounce each at 6 different stores. They're gathering up a couple pounds a day. After a few weeks, they can put it in the trunk and drive across the border. Now, as soon as they have more than 1 ounce in their possession, it is illegal. But it's really hard to catch someone if all they have done is made multiple purchases and put it together. There's no electric utility increase the way there is with an internal grow. It doesn't take any specialized skill. And as I said, moving stuff across the borders is pretty easy. We can even know that right now. The price grading is about $400 per pound per 1,000 miles for smuggling marijuana in the United States. All right. Next prediction is the federal government will not be able to fill in for all of the missing law enforcement that disappears with state legalization. And the simple reason is 99% of the marijuana arrests are by state and local agencies. Even if you leave the pure possession aside and just focus on the production and distribution arrests, it's still 90%. And if you want to see that in pictures, here's all of the arrests the federal government makes each year for marijuana. And then these are bars for each of the different states. The yellow part is the state and local agencies. The blue part is the federal in that state. So, I mean, realistically, Colorado and Washington are not small states, but they're not huge. So it's theoretically possible the DEA could just step in and make up for that enforcement. But it's not something that they relish the idea of doing. They think what they're doing with their agents now is productive, and it would become impossible if a few more states legalized. So I don't think they're going to just replace all of the arresting. What the federal government could do, though, is quash the regulated market, right? You guys are requiring people to apply for licenses. You're going to accept the license applications. Federal government subpoenas your records of licensees, gets the addresses, writes letters to the landlords the same way the U.S. attorneys in California have, and said, I know this will shock you, dear landlord, but your tenant is breaking federal law. We can seize your building, shut it down within 30 days. So the federal government could squash this market within its power, even though it can't fill in for all of the missing enforcement. And that creates a real dilemma, because it means the federal government cannot undo legalization, but it can undo the regulation. It can undo the tax and control structure, creating a double-edged sword dilemma for them. My next prediction is that more states are going to legalize, and some of them will be less responsible than you two. In 2012, 10 states, not just 2, seriously considered legalization measures. 3 were voted on, Washington, Colorado, and Oregon. But there were a lot of propositions, 17. And my students went through, looked at them all, and looked at their provisions. Oh, and I should say, look, and support for legalization has been growing around the country. It's particularly high in certain pockets. Marcus, I was chatting with Tim, and he said, I think earlier to the group, Hawaii has substantial support amongst the populace. So probably more will pass. That does not mean that they're all going to look like Washington and Colorado. If you look at the 17 in 2012, they break down into broadly 3 categories. One category, unlike Washington and Colorado, are what we call repeal only. Very short propositions. Missouri was just 88 words. And all it said was all laws related to marijuana disappear except for laws against underage use. It didn't legalize and create a regulatory structure. It didn't legalize and say you need a license. It didn't legalize and add a tax. It said, poof, all the laws disappear. And then you can delegate all the details to a regulatory agency, or you can lay out in some detail all of the protections that you want to have. And this happens to be a Washington slide, but Colorado also would get pretty high marks in this regard. There are a lot of provisions designed to make this a responsible sort of public health attempt to do legalization. Now, I want to say this in two ways. Sue, you've got 12 criteria on what a good law ought to have to protect the kids. And one of my students, Anna Kucinek, went through and graded all 17 of those proposals on that standard. Every single one of them got an F. Not a single one came close to meeting those standards. But among the 17, you guys were way at the end of this was responsible, this was a serious effort, a thoughtful one. Now, Oregon was by no means at the far other end of the spectrum, but there were things in the Oregon proposition that should give you pause. And Oregon's proposition got 46% yes vote. So take the #1 item up there. It was going to create a new regulatory body called the Oregon Cannabis Commission that was going to be responsible for regulating the industry, preventing diversion, protecting the kids. You're an Oregon person, right? So there were going to be 7 commissioners in your state monitoring this industry. How were they going to be selected? 5 of the 7 were going to be selected by the growers. Let me say that again. 7 commissioners responsible for controlling the industry. The proposition required 5 of the 7 to be selected by the growers. They literally were building regulatory capture right into the enabling legislation. And there were a lot of other ways in which that proposition was quite industry friendly. Banned local opt-out, for instance. And the real killer is it required the Oregon Attorney General to provide legal defense services to anyone prosecuted for an act that this proposition made legal. Right? So the DEA tries to arrest someone, the Attorney General has to be their personal counsel. Now, it was voted down, right? But it got 46% yes vote, and Washington passed with 57. Yeah. Now you said for exactly those reasons. You think that the voters were aware of these issues?
I think that people felt that even people who were the bad folks on leasing that this is very totally different. This is my opinion.
Yep.
A lot of data to back that up.
Yeah. I mean, and I certainly don't either. I hope that's the story. I mean, honestly, 17, the 2 that passed were the 2 most responsible. The crazy ones didn't. I hope that's right, but I really worry that the most of the people on the street are just going to say, it's marijuana legalization, I'm for it or against it, I'm not going to delve into the particular details of the law. Now, I have to stop, I'm sure, because I'm probably over time, but I have to make one final prediction. And my final prediction is I'm wrong on at least some of this stuff. Yogi Berra, the great philosopher, says, prediction is very hard, especially about the future. I am going to plagiarize him with prediction is very hard, especially about marijuana legalization. I'm doing my best to try to understand what this new industry will look like in order to help you guys who are trying to do the regulations. But this is an extraordinarily uncertain time. No modern jurisdiction has ever legalized marijuana before. Let me say that again. No jurisdiction has ever done this. Portugal did not do this. The Netherlands has not done this. Netherlands only legalized use in retail sale. Nobody has ever legalized large-scale for-profit commercial production before. So there is an inevitable uncertainty about how this is going to play out. And good luck. I hope you guys do a very good job.